Okay, let's get started. Lecture 17. I'm glad you all are here. We are going to shift gears a bit. So we just had the midterm. Hope you guys are recovered. And we're going to switch gears onto a new topic. We're going to talk about economic and climate shocks. It's 4 lectures, so it's going to be a kind of chunk of different material. We're going to start talking about Chris Uji's work on credit in rural northern Nigeria first. The next lecture is after spring break. Marshall Burke, who's a co-author of mine and a PhD student here at Berkeley, will be presenting a working paper of his. And he has a bunch of papers, and I was trying to figure out which would be good to present. He's going to talk about income shocks, which is something we're going to talk about today for the next few lectures. We're going to talk about the importance of weather shocks and commodity price shocks and basically the volatility that poor households face in sub-Saharan Africa. But I chose this paper because he's going to talk about the implications of those income shocks for risky sexual choices and the spread of HIV. So it's going to tie into the first half of the course since we did spend so much time talking about health. Then we're going to talk about some work on poverty and witch killings, and then get into a broader analysis on economic shocks and political violence. And what's interesting about this paper and the sort of direction we're going to go is we're going to get into the details of instrumental variable methods, which some of you may have studied in your statistics or econometrics classes, but we're going to sort of talk about the strengths of this tool, the limitations. I think this paper, which is a paper that I worked on, I think highlights both the strengths and the limitations and weaknesses in some cases of IB methods. So I'm going to see this as a good sort of hopefully learning tool, and a couple of the papers later on in the course will use IB methods. So if you're going to really do empirical work in development, knowing about instrumental variables is going to be really important. So anyway, the second half of the course is going to try to dive into these other methods. Okay, any questions or comments before we dive into the material? Questions about the midterm, etc. I think the problem set 2 is pretty much graded, so they're going to be passed back at the next section, and the midterms also going to be passed back after the break. And just, everybody took the same midterm, it was a little too long. I know that now. But everybody took the same test, and it's curved, so. I don't know what to say. Any other questions, or should we get started? Yeah. Yes. Other than you guys, other than being with you guys? I don't know. Spring break, maybe? Is that right? This is from Sierra Leone, actually. So, great. Okay, so why don't we get started? Let's talk about credit and banking. And I was just talking about income shocks. You might say, well, why don't we talk about income shocks? But it's going to turn out that understanding the financial sector and households' ability to both borrow and insure themselves is going to be really central to understanding of how they deal with income shocks. So we're going to start with a discussion of banking and credit. I think we're all familiar with the importance of credit. You don't have to think about rural Nigeria as we will today to understand the importance of the financial sector. Just look at our own economy over the last 4 or 5 years and how problems in the regulation of the financial sector had huge implications for the whole economy. Credit is important for many reasons, but 2 leading benefits we might get from a well-functioning credit system would be A, the ability to finance profitable new investments. So if I have an idea for a project, if I can borrow freely, then I can start my project, be profitable, and share some of the surplus with whomever lent the money to me. That's kind of the idea behind the credit sector. The second thing that credit allows households to do beyond financing a new project or new investment is it allows them to smooth consumption. So imagine that I'm not actually starting a new business, but for whatever reason, my income flows are not stable over time. So there's some periods where I earn a lot of money, other periods where I earn less money, and it's variable for whatever reason. In the case of agricultural households, the weather is going to be a big part of it. Seasonality of the crop cycle is going to be part of it, etc. We'll talk about that. Then I may want to borrow in the lean periods, knowing that, say, a few months down the road, I am going to have my harvest, and I'll pay it back. So this credit will allow me to smooth consumption. In other words, instead of going hungry for a few months during the growing season, I can borrow and then eat the same amount of food throughout the year. Now, there are other ways to smooth consumption. The most obvious way would be to save oneself, so save money from that good harvest and consume it throughout the year. And of course, that's what many households aim to do. But if something comes up along the way, you may run out of money before the next harvest. So I may have saved enough under good circumstances, but there may have been an illness in the family. And I had to spend a lot of my savings dealing with that health problem. Therefore, I'd run out of money if I couldn't borrow. So those are 2 clear ways in which credit is beneficial. When we think about credit here in the US, we tend to think about the formal banking sector. And the formal banking sector is actually growing in importance in sub-Saharan Africa. But historically, it hasn't been very successful. Historically, it's been the financial sector has been relatively small in most African countries and has had a lot of problems. So some of the data that I'll present is dated. It's from the 90s. It's from the period of slow growth that we talked about in the first couple lectures. So the financial sector is actually doing much better today in sub-Saharan Africa than it was 15 years ago. But I think it's still interesting and illustrative to look at some of the data from that earlier period because the financial sector actually really struggled during that period. So one of the challenges, one of the problems in the financial sector at that time was a very high rate of non-performing loans. In other words, loans were made, but default rates were high. You can see immediately why that's a problem, because if banks aren't getting paid back, they're not going to be profitable. And if banks go under, then they're not going to be able to lend to the people who have the good projects or the people who need the consumption smoothing. So the financial sector was just not very profitable for a couple decades there in the 1980s and 90s. And actually, the rate of non-performing loans in the 90s, and this is sort of a paper that came out a while ago now, but really illustrated the problem in the 90s, the rate of non-performing loans was just staggeringly high. So an order of magnitude higher than what you would see, say, in the U.S. financial system in good periods. Of course, the U.S. had its own crisis with tons of defaults on mortgages and whatnot. So never at these rates, but due to recession or related to recessions, default rates can rise in certain periods. So the rates here are very high. Senegal 50%, at some points Kenya 20-something% in the 90s. A number of these countries had banking scandals in the 1990s. There was a common pattern in a number of countries where political corruption hindered the financial system. So we're actually going to talk about corruption in a few weeks, but just to sort of highlight some of these issues now, you can see immediately why politically powerful people would like banks and would like to be corrupt with banks. They have a lot of money. They have a lot of money basically sitting there. If you're a rich politician and you can get access somehow to loans, and because of your politically powerful position, you don't need to pay the loans back, that's a pretty good deal for you. It's basically just theft. So that was an explanation for the high default rates in a lot of banking systems in sub-Saharan Africa during this period. This problem is not confined to sub-Saharan Africa. For people that want to see what's probably the best academic study on political corruption in the banking system, there's a paper by Asim Khwaja and Atif Mian in the Quarterly Journal of Economics, I think it's 2005, examining political corruption in the financial sector in Pakistan in the 1990s. So this is a great paper because they were actually able to get a very unique data set. They were able to get the universe of all bank loans made in Pakistan in the 1990s. They have hundreds of thousands of loans. They were also able to get the names of the boards of directors of all firms registered in Pakistan, so tens of thousands of people on boards of directors, and the names of all politicians who had ever run for office in Pakistan. And they matched these three data sets. And it turns out if you're a politician, you get loans more frequently than other people, and you don't pay them back. And they document that in all kinds of gory detail. None of the data sets for these countries has been made publicly available in the same way, but I think there's a feeling that in many countries, politically powerful people are able to access loans at good rates, and the banks really never really try to collect the money from them. Let me pause for a second. I've given you a very broad and somewhat scattered view of this issue. What are people's reactions or thoughts? Uh-huh. Yep. Yep. Yeah. 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 Yeah, that's a great point, and it's sort of this issue of the timing of lending and sort of how it links up with the timing of price changes is a very active research area. In fact, I was trying to decide, I mentioned that Marshall Burke is going to give a guest lecture. He's working on a project very closely related to what you're talking about, so he won't talk about that on Tuesday, but the basic idea behind what you said is right, which is very often around harvest time, if we think of this as price, around harvest time, prices of crops bottom out, and then they rise just before the next harvest. And what you ideally like to do, if you're able to store your crop over time, is take advantage of this increase. So in some of Marshall's work, he got data for several dozen African grain markets. He's mainly focusing on East Africa. And you find that there are increases on average about 40% just over sort of seasonal effects on average. So huge increases in price. So if there's any way you can hold on to your crop until here, you'd be a lot better off. But it turns out people are selling a ton here for a lot of reasons. They have debts they have to make up. They have to pay school fees. There's other pressing needs at that time. So I think you're onto something there. And this again speaks to the value of credit. A project that Marshall and I are working on together is an experiment that's providing credit at this point. So basically at harvest time to enable people to store grain. Because a 40% return over 6 months is like a great return. Most credit is provided at different points. Most credit is provided here when people are running short on food, and then they pay it back at harvest. But credit can be very profitable this other time of the year. So any other comments or thoughts? Yeah. Uh-huh. That's right. So to the extent that rule of law, institutional quality, etc., as made by Asinoglou Johnson Robinson, that's a really essential issue in African development, that affects society in many ways. Not just through the functioning of the political system or democracy or whatnot, but it can affect the functioning of the financial sector. And if the financial sector isn't working well, the financial sector is seen as such an important sector because if it isn't working well, then none of these other sectors or industries can get credit to grow. So it becomes a bottleneck on the growth of the whole economy, potentially. Yeah. Yeah. You're saying of these here, this is going to depend country by country. So there are big differences across African countries. It's changing a bit now, but in the role of the state in the financial sector and also the role of the state in industry. So it's hard to say what fraction overall. It'll depend on the country. There's been a big increase in the private financial sector over the last 10 years in sub-Saharan Africa. So that's something where things have changed. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so there was a big financial corruption scandal, say in Kenya in the 90s, but it wasn't involving the foreign banks. Now again, the data is best for Pakistan, which is a different case, but in the Pakistani case, they compared domestic banks and large international banks. And they found that all this behavior of politically connected people getting loans and not paying them back was occurring in the domestic banks, and in particular the state-owned banks. So the state-owned banks, you can kind of see it in the sense that if I'm politically influential, I may be able to manipulate what the state-owned banks do, and I'm a politician, so I have this influence. They didn't find any of it from the sort of international private banks because they didn't have influence over those banks. Those banks answered other people and whatnot. So a big change from the period studied by Kane and Rice is the growth of these sort of international private banking chains or corporations that are going to be much less subject to this kind of influence. So I think you're right on in what you're saying. I think the reality has shifted since this period with the rise of private banks. So an alternative to the formal banking sector, which traditionally didn't work well, and especially in the 80s and 90s, is informal lending. So there's a lot of different ways that informal lending could work. Chris Udry's paper is going to focus on basically individual to individual lending, so the most sort of informal lending. But there's other forms of lending that's less formal than going to a bank or commercial bank and getting a loan. One is, you could think of, there's a lot of varieties of this, but microfinance lending. There's various institutions, some which are more or less local, that have group joint liability microfinance. Groups of people get together, and they basically commit to repay the loan if any of the group members default. So imagine there's 10 of us in a group, and the 10 of us go in, we get a loan from a microfinance institution, and we commit to the microfinance institution that if one or two of the people in the group can't repay, we'll cover them. But the idea is they would kind of cover us if we couldn't repay in a period. And that sort of social solidarity within the group may allow people who individually are unable to access capital to get access to capital going in as a group. So that's that can be more or less formal, that process. There are some formal commercial banks getting into microfinance, but a lot of the microfinance lending has gone through NGOs at a much smaller scale than commercial lending would be at. Another type of informal lending mechanism is what are called rotating credit and saving associations, or ROSCAs. These go by different names in different countries. In East Africa, they're called merry-go-rounds. That's what they're called. It's a great name. And in other parts of sub-Saharan Africa, they go by other names. So these are similar to microcredit, but different in other ways. Typically there, one individual per round gets a loan, which they have to repay over time. So let's say there's 12 of us in a group, and we meet monthly. So each month, one of us gets a pot of money. So each of us puts in, say, $20 into the pot. And then the 20 times 12 goes to one of us. and that person then pays back their loan over the next 12 months. And they basically, by paying back, some of the money goes to the next person. That's why it's a rotating savings and credit group. Again, there has to be a lot of trust and cooperation within the group because the risk in a Roscoe is if I'm the first person to get the $240, the risk is I'll take your $240, I'll run off with the money. And if that happens, the whole group breaks down. So you have to have some mechanism for enforcing repayment, pretty similar to the mechanism in microfinance by which we cover each other's debts if one of us defaults, et cetera. So the idea with most of these groups is you want to get people who already have some pre-existing relationship, who can trust each other, work together, et cetera. And that kind of notion of the importance of informal social ties in allowing for informal lending is going to be central to Udry's article and his argument. Okay, so what he does is he studies households in northern Nigeria in Kaduna State. It's a small sample compared to some of the samples you've seen so far. What the sample lacks in sample size, it makes up for in detail. So Udry actually did monthly surveys over I think a year and a half or something with these 198 households. He's a very friendly guy, thankfully, because if you're not, it's just not going to work if you're coming every month. You've got to be pretty friendly. And it turns out at that period of time, when he was doing his data collection in the late 1980s, there were very few formal financial institutions near these villages in northern Nigeria. So the vast majority of lending that he documents was informal lending among individuals within the same village. That's really how people got credit. They didn't usually access credit outside the village. I'll talk about some caveats to that. So let's do a clicker question. So thinking about the advantages of informal lending or potential advantages, here are 4 potential advantages. I want you guys to pick your favorite potential advantage, and or do none of the above. So is informal lending sort of preferred because the informal lenders have more capital, because they're better positioned to appeal to government legal authorities if there isn't repayment, because they have better information about the borrower's production outcomes, because they operate over a wider geographic area, or none of the above? Let's just go another 10 seconds, shall we? Okay, so you guys, I can see the answers here already. You guys pretty much got what I was looking for here. I kind of set this up. I just want to make sure you guys are awake. So yeah, these, informal lenders don't have more capital. They have no formal legal standing like corporations do. They're very local. But their big advantage is C, which is exactly what you guys got, which is because they're local, they actually know what's going on in their own communities. In the theory that's been developed over the last few decades within economics on the functioning of credit markets, the central concern in credit markets is asymmetric information, a lack of information on both sides, the lending and the borrowing. And the reason why that's so important, and it really can hinder credit markets, is the possibility that people will default on a loan even when they don't need to. That's what's called moral hazard. So if the banks really just don't know much and they can't observe much about my activities, I can claim I was hit with a terrible crop year, I can claim that pests ate my crop, I can claim all kinds of things, and if the bank doesn't know better, it's just going to be hard for them to know how lenient or harsh to be with me. But if informal lenders are in the same village and they can see my fields, and they see me every day and they know what's going on with my life, it's going to be a lot harder for me to spin some story about what's going on with my crops. Okay, so this is actually, the boxes around Nigeria and the dot is on Kaduna in the north. So this is a pretty interesting area. The way Udry describes it, even though there wasn't very much formal penetration of the formal financial sector, this was not a very poor area at all. So 70-something% of households sold either vegetables or cash crops, non-food cash crops to market. The majority of households hired labor to work on their farms, 53%. 90-something% of them had been using chemical fertilizer. That's a very high rate, actually. So they're pretty well integrated into the market. They're using some sophisticated inputs like chemical fertilizer, et cetera. So it's a pretty well-off area. He also said that year and kind of the years preceding the year he studied these 4 villages were years of pretty good rainfall, actually. So it was a pretty prosperous time in this area of northern Nigeria. I want you to keep that in the back of your minds because when we go through the results, I just want to have you keep asking yourself, what would this look like in a bad year? And when we talk about the Tanzanian case, the Meatu Tanzania case with the witch killing outbreak there, that's going to be a case where there were some bad years. And it's just something important to keep in mind. I will say this part of Nigeria has changed a lot politically recently because the area near Kaduna has been a hotbed of attacks by the Boko Haram Islamic terrorist group the last 3-4 years. So sort of on a weekly basis, there's schools and churches being blown up right around the villages where Udry was collecting data 20-some years ago. Okay, so beyond being integrated into markets, these households are very active in the credit market. Around 90% had engaged in some borrowing or lending in the previous year, but very interestingly, a very small fraction of that came from formal sources. Almost all of it was informal. A few people got bank loans. Most of that 7.5% actually were people that had gotten loans from a local tobacco company. So the cash crop in this area is tobacco, and the tobacco company would sometimes lend people money to live like the time we talked about, lend people money during the growing season for different inputs, better seeds and fertilizer and whatnot, and get repaid after the harvest. But still, that was only 7.5% of total credit. So informal lending is like the only game in town here, pretty much. So it's interesting to try to understand how it works. Table 2 shows the breakdown. This is sort of like a little 2x2 table. That upper left corner, the 10%, are those who neither lent nor borrowed. The bottom right corner both lent and borrowed, and then the cross turns did one or the other. But only 10% did nothing in the credit market in this year. So that's really high. If you think of yourself or your own life, in the course of a year, how much informal borrowing and lending are you doing among friends or neighbors or family? My guess is it would be less than 90% of people that are doing some of that lending. I mean, unless you lend someone money because they forgot money and you go to lunch or something, and maybe that, I don't know if we count that or not, but if you have forgetful friends or you're forgetful yourself. But I think this is a little bit more substantial because the average loan is equivalent to 50 days of agricultural labor. So that's a much bigger loan than $6 for like a rice bowl or whatever. So, okay. That's what I ate for lunch. Sorry, it's on my mind. Okay, so what else do we know about these loans? Not only is everybody lending and borrowing money, they're doing it from village residents or relatives. It's really money that's being lent within a very tight-knit network. So again, going back to this issue of how microcredit works or Roscoe's work, informal lending seems to have the same property that people are lending who are very close to each other, and they're large. As I mentioned, the average loan is about 50 days of work. And the timing of the loan is sort of this traditional timing where you're borrowing money during the growing season and you pay it back at the harvest. That's the most typical type of lending. So for whatever reason, at the start of the harvest, you're short on money, so you can't buy fertilizer, but I'm doing pretty well. I'll lend you money for fertilizer. When the harvest comes, you pay me back. And maybe next year, because I had a health problem in my family, I'm short on money, but you're doing okay, you'll lend me money. And so there's a lot, even if he doesn't have tons of data on this, it's a little anecdotal, there appears to be a lot of long-term lending among families and individuals